The snow fell silently, coating the barren landscape of Hecla, Colorado Territory, 1871, as Tabitha Pierce stared at the empty pantry shelves with hollow eyes. Her trembling fingers clutched the edge of the wooden cabinet while her two children slept in the next room, unaware that their mother had given them her last portion of food 3 days ago. Winter had been unforgiving, a brutal force that had stolen her husband, frozen her crops, and left her with nothing but the four walls of a homestead that felt more like a tomb with each passing day. Tabitha closed the pantry door and pressed her forehead against the rough wood. James had been gone for over 6 months now, claimed by a mining accident that had left her a widow at 26 with 5-year-old Emma and 3-year-old Samuel to raise alone. The mining company had given her a paltry sum as compensation, barely enough to last the first month. She'd stretched it as far as she could, planting a small garden and taking in mending work from town. But the early frost had killed her vegetables before they could yield much, and the townsfolk had little to spare for seamstress work as the winter grew harsher. She walked to the window, watching the snow build drifts against the fence line. Tomorrow she would have to make the difficult journey into town. There was no choice left. She would have to beg for credit at the general store or seek charity from the church. The thought turned her stomach with shame, but her children's hungry faces haunted her more than any wounded pride. The wind howled through the cracks in the window frame as Tabitha wrapped herself in a threadbare blanket. She would not cry tonight. Tears would not feed her children or warm their bodies. Instead, she made silent plans and prayed for mercy from the unforgiving Colorado winter. At first light, Tabitha woke to Emma's small hand on her cheek. "Mama, I'm hungry," the child whispered, her blue eyes wide and hopeful. Tabitha pulled her daughter close. "I know, sweetheart, we're going to town today. We'll find something to eat." The promise felt hollow, but she kept her voice steady. Samuel toddled into the room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Breakfast?" he asked hopefully. "Soon," Tabitha promised, rising from the bed. She dressed them warmly in layers of patched clothing, wrapped them in blankets, and prepared the wagon for the journey into Hecla. The 7-mile trek would be difficult in the snow, but their old mare, Penny, was the one thing Tabitha had refused to sell. James had given Penny to her on their wedding day, and the gentle horse was not only transportation, but also a connection to the husband she had loved so deeply. The journey was slow and arduous. The children huddled together beneath the blankets while Tabitha guided Penny through the snow-covered trail. Her fingers grew numb despite her worn gloves, and her breath formed clouds in the frigid air. "Mama, look." Emma pointed ahead where the trail curved around a stand of pine trees. A lone rider approached from the opposite direction, his tall figure silhouetted against the white landscape. Tabitha tensed, one hand instinctively moving toward the small knife she kept in her pocket. Strangers could mean danger for a woman alone with her children, especially on a deserted trail. The man drew closer, and Tabitha could make out the details of his appearance. He sat tall in the saddle, with broad shoulders beneath a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the cold. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, moved with confident steps through the deep snow. "Morning, madam," the stranger called, tipping his hat as he approached. His voice was deep and respectful, with a hint of a southern drawl. "Mighty cold day for traveling with little ones." Tabitha nodded stiffly. "We're heading to town." The man studied her face, then glanced at the children huddled in the wagon. His eyes, a startling green against his weathered face, seemed to take in their situation in an instant. "Name's Vaughn Calloway," he said. "Recently arrived from Texas. Heading to the Broken Spur Ranch to meet with Mr. Holden about work." "Tabitha Pierce," she replied, still wary but slightly reassured by his polite manner. "These are my children, Emma and Samuel." Emma peeked out from the blankets and offered a small wave. Samuel remained hidden, only his eyes visible. "You folks look like you could use some company on the trail," Vaughn observed. "Mind if I ride alongside? These parts can be dangerous for travelers alone." Tabitha hesitated. She had learned to be cautious since James died, but there was something in Vaughn Calloway's eyes that seemed trustworthy. And if she were honest with herself, the company would be welcome on the difficult journey. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. That would be appreciated." Vaughn nodded and guided his horse alongside the wagon. As they traveled, he maintained a respectful distance while keeping a watchful eye on the surrounding landscape. The trail to Hecla was mostly empty, with only occasional signs of wildlife crossing through the deep snow. "You from around these parts, Mrs. Pierce?" Vaughn asked after they had traveled in silence for some time. "My husband and I settled here 6 years ago," Tabitha replied. "He worked the Silver Creek mine until—" Her voice faltered. Vaughn nodded, understanding without requiring her to finish the painful sentence. "Mining's dangerous work. I lost my father that way back in Virginia." His simple acknowledgement of her loss without pity or awkwardness eased something in Tabitha's chest. "What brings you to Colorado territory from Texas, Mr. Calloway?" "Change of scenery," he said with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ranch I worked for down in the Panhandle sold out to cattle barons. Figured it was time to move on." "Heard Mr. Holden was looking for experienced hands." "John Holden is a fair employer," Tabitha offered. "His wife Martha brings food baskets to families in need after church on Sundays." She didn't add that her family had been recipients of Martha's charity twice since James died, and that her pride had prevented her from attending church the past month to avoid another offering. The sound of Samuel's stomach growling cut through the conversation, and Tabitha felt her face flush with shame. Vaughn pretended not to notice, but within moments, he reached into his saddlebag and produced a small package wrapped in waxed paper. "Got some jerky here if the little ones are hungry," he said, offering it to her without meeting her eyes, as if understanding how difficult it might be for her to accept. "Made it myself before I left Texas. Got plenty more." Tabitha wanted to refuse, but Emma was already reaching for the package, her eyes wide with hunger. "Thank you," Tabitha murmured, taking the jerky and breaking it into pieces for her children. She didn't take any for herself. Vaughn noticed but said nothing, merely nodding and continuing to ride alongside them as they made their way toward town. Hecla came into view an hour later, a small collection of buildings nestled in the valley. Smoke rose from chimneys and a few people moved along the main street bundled against the cold. Tabitha felt both relief and dread as they approached. Relief that they had arrived safely, dread at what lay ahead begging for credit or charity. "Where are you heading first?" Vaughn asked as they reached the edge of town. "The general store," Tabitha replied. She didn't elaborate on why, but her tense posture said enough. Vaughn nodded thoughtfully. "Mind if I accompany you? I need to pick up a few supplies myself before heading to the Broken Spur." Tabitha hesitated, then nodded. There was no reason to refuse his company, and perhaps having a man beside her would make Mr. Winters at the general store more inclined to extend credit. They hitched their horses outside Winters' general store, and Vaughn helped Emma and Samuel down from the wagon. The children looked around eagerly, their hunger momentarily forgotten in the excitement of being in town. The bell above the door jingled as they entered the warm store. Mr. Winters, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. His welcoming smile faltered slightly when he saw Tabitha. "Mrs. Pierce," he greeted her, his tone polite but guarded. "What can I do for you today?" Tabitha straightened her spine, gathering her courage. "Mr. Winters, I need some flour, beans, and perhaps a bit of salt pork if you have it." She lowered her voice. "I was hoping I might put it on account until spring when I can sell some eggs and vegetables." Mr. Winters' expression grew uncomfortable. "I'm afraid I can't extend any more credit, Mrs. Pierce. Your account is all ready." He glanced down at his ledger. "Well, it's considerable." Tabitha felt the blood drain from her face. She was aware of her debt, but she had hoped for mercy given the circumstances. "Please, Mr. Winters." "My children haven't eaten properly in days. The winter, I understand your situation, Mr. Winters interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. But I have a business to run and I've already extended more credit than I can afford. Perhaps the church I'll stand for Mrs. Pierce's purchases, Vaughn's deep voice cut in. He stepped forward, placing a leather pouch on the counter. The distinct sound of coins clinked inside. And I'll settle her existing account as well. Tabitha turned to him, stunned. Mr. Calloway, I cannot accept. It's not charity, madam, Vaughn said quietly, for her ears alone. Consider it a loan between neighbors. You can repay me when your situation improves. Mr. Winters eyed the pouch with approval and quickly calculated Tabitha's outstanding debt, adding the cost of the new supplies she needed. Vaughn counted out the coins without comment, and Mr. Winters began gathering the requested items. Add coffee, sugar, and some of that dried fruit as well, Vaughn instructed, nodding toward the glass jars on the shelf. And whatever else the children might need. Emma tugged on Tabitha's skirt, pointing to a jar of hard candy by the register. Tabitha shook her head gently, but Vaughn noticed and added a few pieces to their order. When Mr. Winters had packed everything into crates, Vaughn lifted them easily and carried them to Tabitha's wagon. She followed him, her mind racing with confusion and gratitude. Mr. Calloway, she began once they were outside, I don't know how to thank you, but I cannot accept such generosity without Mrs. Pierce, he interrupted gently. I've ridden enough trails to know when someone's fallen on hard times. I've been there myself. All I ask is that you accept the help today, and someday, when you're able, you can do the same for someone else. Tabitha blinked back tears, nodding slowly. Thank you, truly. Vaughn tipped his hat and turned to untie his horse. I should head to the Broken Spur now. Need to see about that job before nightfall. The Broken Spur is another hour's ride east, Tabitha said. The snow's getting deeper and the day is waning. Perhaps you could rest at our homestead tonight and continue tomorrow. It's on the way, and it would give me a chance to offer you a hot meal with the supplies you've provided. The invitation surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. Tabitha hadn't welcomed anyone into her home since the neighbors had gathered after James's funeral. But something about Vaughn Calloway's quiet dignity and kindness made the offer feel right. Vaughn considered her proposal. I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition, Tabitha assured him. It's the least I can do to thank you. Besides, the children would enjoy the company. She glanced at Emma and Samuel, who were already happily munching on the candy Vaughn had purchased. After a moment's consideration, Vaughn nodded. Much obliged, Mrs. Pierce. I accept your hospitality. The return journey seemed easier than the morning's trek. The children were more animated with food in their bellies, and Vaughn entertained them with stories of Texas and the wild horses he had tamed. Tabitha found herself laughing at his tales, a sound so unfamiliar that it startled her when it escaped her lips. As they approached the Pierce homestead, Tabitha saw it through new eyes: the sagging fence, the weathered clapboards, the chimney that leaked smoke on windy days. It was a far cry from the hopeful home she and James had built, but it was still standing, still sheltering her family. It's not much, she said apologetically as they pulled up to the house. But it's home. Vaughn surveyed the property with an experienced eye. Good land, he observed, solid foundation, nothing wrong here that can't be fixed with some work. His words warmed her more than they should have. It had been so long since anyone had seen potential rather than poverty in her circumstances. Tabitha bustled about the kitchen, preparing a stew with the supplies Vaughn had purchased. The children sat at the table, drawing pictures with the stubs of pencils they treasured, while Vaughn stoked the fire in the hearth, adding wood from the dwindling pile by the door. Your woodpile's running low, he commented, not as criticism but as observation. Tabitha nodded as she chopped carrots. I've been rationing it. There's a stand of trees on the north edge of the property, but I haven't had time to cut more between caring for the children and trying to keep up with other chores. Vaughn glanced out the window at the fading light. I could fell a few trees for you tomorrow before I head out, stack them by the door to dry. You've done more than enough already, Tabitha protested. It's no trouble, Vaughn insisted. I'll sleep better knowing you have enough wood to stay warm. The stew simmered on the stove, filling the small house with a savory aroma that made everyone's mouths water. When Tabitha served it in mismatched bowls, the children ate with enthusiasm, and Vaughn accepted his portion with genuine appreciation. "Best meal I've had in months," he declared. And though Tabitha suspected he was being kind, the compliment pleased her nonetheless. After dinner, when the children were tucked into their bed in the small room off the main living area, Tabitha and Vaughn sat by the fire with cups of coffee. The warmth and food had brought color back to her cheeks, and for the first time in weeks she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. "May I ask what happened to your husband?" Vaughn inquired gently, breaking the comfortable silence. Tabitha stared into her coffee cup. "Mine collapse. Last summer, there were 7 men trapped, none survived." The words were blunt, but she had learned that dressing them up only made the telling more painful. "James was a good man. He worked hard to build this place for us." "I'm sorry for your loss," Vaughn said simply. "Losing someone you love changes everything." "You speak from experience," Tabitha observed, looking up at him. Vaughn nodded, his expression shadowed by the firelight. "My wife, Sarah, and our infant son died of fever 3 years ago in Texas. I stayed on at the ranch we worked, but when it sold." He shrugged. Seemed like the right time to move on. Tabitha felt a connection forming between them, a shared understanding of grief that needed no elaborate expressions. "And so you came to Colorado." "And so I came to Colorado," he agreed with a slight smile. "New territory, new beginnings." They talked late into the evening, sharing stories of their lives before loss had reshaped them. Vaughn spoke of his childhood in Virginia, his time as a Union soldier during the war, and his journey west afterward. Tabitha told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, meeting James at a church social, and their decision to seek their fortune in the Colorado Territory when land was being offered to settlers. When Tabitha finally showed Vaughn to the small storage room where he could sleep, she felt lighter than she had in months. There was something about sharing burdens that made them less heavy, even if nothing had actually changed. The next morning, Tabitha woke to the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood. She wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped onto the porch to find Vaughn already hard at work, a substantial pile of logs stacked neatly against the house. "You're up early," she called, pulling her shawl tighter against the morning chill. Vaughn paused, leaning on the axe handle. "Wanted to get a good start before heading to the Broken Spur. Sun's up, so I am too." Tabitha smiled. "I'll make breakfast. The children will be up soon." By the time Emma and Samuel were dressed, and at the table, Tabitha had prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with a bit of the precious sugar Vaughn had purchased. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling, and the children ate happily while Vaughn finished his work outside. When he came in, his cheeks ruddy from exertion and cold, Tabitha placed a steaming bowl before him. "It's not much of a thank you for all you've done, but it's hot at least." "It's perfect," Vaughn assured her, taking a seat at the table. He entertained the children with more stories as he ate, and Tabitha found herself watching the easy way he interacted with them, the gentle patience he showed when Samuel interrupted or Emma asked a dozen questions in a row. After breakfast, Vaughn prepared to leave for the Broken Spur. He packed his few belongings and saddled his horse while Tabitha and the children stood on the porch to see him off. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness, Mr. Calloway," Tabitha said as he mounted his horse. "Vaughn, please," he replied, "and there's no need for thanks." "I'm glad our paths crossed, Mrs. Pierce." "Tabitha," she offered in return, a small smile tugging at her lips. Emma tugged at Vaughn's pant leg. "Will you come back to visit us, Mr. Vaughn?" Vaughn looked to Tabitha, his expression questioning. When she nodded, he smiled down at Emma. "I reckon I might if your mama doesn't mind the company." "The company would be welcome," Tabitha said softly. With a tip of his hat, Vaughn turned his horse toward the east and set off for the Broken Spur Ranch, leaving Tabitha and her children watching from the porch until he disappeared from view. For the first time in months, Tabitha faced the day with a sense of possibility rather than dread. The pantry had food, the woodpile was stocked, and somehow the future seemed less bleak than it had just yesterday. 2 weeks passed before Tabitha saw Vaughn again. She had begun to wonder if his promise to visit had been merely a kind gesture to please Emma, when the sound of hoofbeats approached the homestead one Saturday afternoon. Emma ran to the window, her face lighting up as she recognized the rider. "Mama, it's Mr. Vaughn," she called excitedly. Tabitha felt her heart quicken as she smoothed her apron and checked her reflection in the small mirror by the door. She had washed her hair that morning and pinned it in a simple but neat style, something she had neglected to do for months during her deepest grief. The coincidence of looking her best on the day Vaughn chose to visit brought a flush to her cheeks. Vaughn rode up to the house leading a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze down her face. He dismounted with a smile, accepting Emma's enthusiastic greeting as she ran from the porch to meet him. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Pierce," he called, lifting his hat. "Mr. Calloway," Tabitha returned with a nod, stepping down from the porch. "What a surprise." "Hope I'm not intruding," Vaughn said, a touch of uncertainty in his voice. "I've been settling in at the Broken Spur, and Mr. Holden mentioned you might be in need of a milk cow or work horse. I remembered you had that garden plot that looked like it could use tilling come spring." He patted the mare's neck. "This is Daisy. Mr. Holden was looking to sell her, but I thought maybe we could work out an arrangement. She's gentle enough for the children to handle, strong enough for light plowing, and she's about to drop a foal in the spring." Tabitha approached the mare, running a hand along her sleek neck. "She's beautiful, but I couldn't possibly afford. I thought perhaps we might barter," Vaughn suggested. "I notice your fence needs mending and that roof could use some patching before the spring rains." "I'm handy with tools and Sundays are my day off from the ranch." Tabitha studied him, trying to understand his motivations. "That seems like an uneven trade in my favor, Mr. Calloway," Vaughn shifted, adjusting his hat. "Truth is, Mrs. Pierce, I've found the bunkhouse at the Broken Spur to be a lonely place on Sundays. The other hands head into town for drinking and carousing, which isn't to my taste. I'd welcome some pleasant company and a home-cooked meal once a week in exchange for a few hours of labor." The honest admission touched Tabitha. She recognized the loneliness in his eyes, having felt it so acutely herself. "In that case, I accept your proposition, Mr. Calloway, though I insist you call me Tabitha if we're to be friends." "Vaughn," he reminded her with a smile. "And I'm much obliged, Tabitha." That first Sunday established a pattern that would continue through the remaining winter months. Vaughn would arrive mid-morning, often with small gifts: a sack of apples from the ranch's cellar, a jar of honey from a beekeeper in town, a wooden toy he had carved for the children during the long evenings in the bunkhouse. He worked tirelessly on the homestead, repairing the fence, patching the roof, reinforcing the chicken coop, and a dozen other tasks that Tabitha had been unable to manage alone. In return, she prepared a proper Sunday dinner, using the supplies he often brought to supplement what they had. The children adored him. Emma would follow him around, asking endless questions about horses and cattle and the wider world beyond their homestead. Samuel, normally shy with strangers, had taken to Vaughn immediately, often sitting beside him as he worked, handing him tools and watching with solemn concentration. As February gave way to March and the worst of winter began to ease, Tabitha found herself looking forward to Sundays with an anticipation that bordered on improper for a widow not yet a year into her mourning. She told herself it was merely the relief of having help with the homestead, of seeing her children happy, of having adult conversation after days of isolation. But in quiet moments, when the children were asleep and she sat alone by the fire, Tabitha acknowledged the truth to herself. She was developing feelings for Vaughn Calloway, feelings that both exhilarated and frightened her. On a particularly mild Sunday in late March, when the snow had begun to melt, and the first hints of green were appearing in sheltered spots, Vaughn arrived with an unusual request. "I thought perhaps, if you're willing, we might take the children on a picnic," he suggested as he dismounted. "There's a nice spot by the creek on the south edge of your property. The ground's dry enough now, and it would do everyone good to get some fresh air and sunshine." Tabitha hesitated. A picnic seemed frivolous when there was still so much work to be done. And yet, the idea of spending time together away from the constant reminder of chores was appealing. "I've brought bread and cheese," Vaughn added, patting his saddlebag. "And I found some early spring berries growing on a south-facing slope yesterday." Emma, who had been listening, tugged at Tabitha's skirt. "Please, Mama, can we go on a picnic with Mr. Vaughn?" Faced with her daughter's pleading eyes and Vaughn's hopeful expression, Tabitha relented. "I suppose a few hours away from the house wouldn't hurt. Let me pack some hard-boiled eggs and the last of yesterday's cornbread." The spot Vaughn had chosen was perfect, a small clearing near the creek, protected from the wind by a stand of cottonwoods. The ground was dry and beginning to show tufts of new grass. Vaughn spread a blanket he had brought, and they arranged their simple feast upon it. The children, excited by the adventure, ran along the creek bank, searching for interesting stones and sticks, while Tabitha and Vaughn sat on the blanket, watching them with contented smiles. "They seem happy today," Vaughn observed. "Samuel's talking more than I've heard before." Tabitha nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "They've changed since you started visiting. Before, they were so quiet, so careful not to ask for things or complain. Now they laugh again." She looked at him directly. "You've brought joy back into their lives, Vaughn, into our home." Vaughn's eyes softened as he met her gaze. "If that's true, then I'm glad of it. But Tabitha, you should know that these Sundays have meant as much to me as they seem to have meant to your family. More, perhaps." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "After Sarah and the baby died, I thought that part of my life was over. I didn't expect to find contentment again. Certainly not happiness." Tabitha felt her pulse quicken as he continued. "But being here with you and the children has awakened something I thought was dead. I find myself thinking about this place, about all of you during the week, counting the days until Sunday." Tabitha looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. "I've thought of you as well," she admitted softly. "More than is proper for a widow." Vaughn reached out slowly and covered her hand with his own. The touch was gentle, but sent warmth spreading through her body. "There's no impropriety in finding comfort after loss, Tabitha, no timeline for when a heart can begin to heal." She met his eyes again, seeing in them the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that she felt. "What are you saying, Vaughn?" "I'm saying that I care for you and your children, that I would like to call on you properly if you're willing. Not just as a friend or neighbor, but as a man who admires a woman and wishes to court her." The directness of his words startled her, but Tabitha appreciated his honesty. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her as a woman, not just as a widow or a mother. "I care for you too," she confessed. "But I worry that it's too soon, that people will talk, that the children adore you," Vaughn interrupted gently. "And as for people talking, well, folks will always find something to gossip about. What matters is what feels right to you." Tabitha considered his words, watching as Emma showed Samuel how to skip stones across the creek's surface. She thought of James, of the love they had shared, of the life they had built. Would he want her to remain alone, struggling to maintain his legacy? Or would he want her to find happiness again, to provide their children with stability and care? "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like you to court me, Vaughn Calloway, but carefully and with respect for what came before." Vaughn's face broke into a warm smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I can be patient, Tabitha Pierce. We have time." The children's shouts interrupted the moment as they ran back to the blanket, eager to show their treasures. But something had shifted between Tabitha and Vaughn. an understanding that carried them through the remainder of their picnic and the walk back to the homestead. As spring progressed, Vaughn continued his Sunday visits, but now they took on a new dimension. He began bringing small gifts specifically for Tabitha, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry he had found in town, wildflowers gathered on his ride to the homestead. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal, as they shared stories of their pasts and tentative hopes for the future. One Sunday in early April, Vaughn arrived leading not only Daisy but also his own horse, saddled and ready for riding. "I thought you might enjoy a ride this morning," he suggested when Tabitha greeted him. The widow Johnson agreed to watch the children for a few hours. Said she'd be happy to have young ones around again. Tabitha hesitated. "It's been years since I've ridden anywhere but to town in the wagon." "Daisy's gentle as a lamb," Vaughn assured her, "and I thought you might like to see something I've discovered on the northern ridge." Curiosity overcame her hesitation, and after settling the children with Mrs. Johnson, who had walked over from her neighboring homestead, Tabitha allowed Vaughn to help her mount Daisy. His hands at her waist sent a flutter through her stomach that had nothing to do with the prospect of riding. They rode at an easy pace, Vaughn pointing out signs of spring new leaves on the aspen trees, wildflowers pushing through the soil, a family of rabbits darting through the underbrush. Tabitha felt a freedom she had almost forgotten, the wind in her hair and the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her. The northern ridge offered a spectacular view of the valley, with Hecla visible in the distance, and the mountains rising majestically beyond. But it was what lay on the ridge itself that took Tabitha's breath away, a meadow carpeted with the first wildflowers of spring, a riot of color against the brown and green landscape. "It's beautiful," she breathed as Vaughn helped her dismount. "I had no idea this was here." "I found it last week while tracking some stray cattle," Vaughn explained. "Thought you might appreciate it, being cooped up at the homestead most days." They walked among the flowers, Vaughn occasionally stooping to identify a particular bloom for her. Tabitha felt younger than she had in years, almost girlish in her delight at the simple pleasure of the outing. When they stopped to rest, sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the meadow, Vaughn took her hand in his. The gesture felt natural now, comfortable. "I've been thinking," he began, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Mr. Holden has offered me the position of foreman at the Broken Spur, starting next month when the current man retires. It comes with the use of a small cabin on the property, not just a bunk in the common house." Tabitha felt her heart quicken. "That's wonderful news, Vaughn. You deserve the recognition. It would mean a more stable position," he continued. "Better pay, a proper home." He paused, gathering his courage. "A home that could accommodate a family if I were to have one." Tabitha's breath caught in her throat as she realized where his words were leading. "I know it's soon," Vaughn said, turning to face her fully. "I know that you're still healing, still finding your way forward, but I've come to care deeply for you, Tabitha, for Emma and Samuel too. And if you could consider the possibility of building a life together, I would count myself the luckiest man in Colorado territory." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes, not of sorrow but of a complicated joy. "Oh, Vaughn," she whispered, "I care for you too, more than I thought possible after James." "But marriage, it's such a big step." "It is," he agreed, "and I'm not asking for an answer today, only that you think about it, about us, about what might be possible." Tabitha looked out over the valley, considering his words. The prospect of marriage to Vaughn brought a tangle of emotions: hope, fear, excitement, guilt. She had loved James with all her heart, had imagined growing old with him. But he was gone, and she was still here, still young, still capable of love. "I will think about it," she promised, squeezing his hand. "Truly," Vaughn smiled, lifting her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "That's all I ask." The ride back to the homestead was quiet, each lost in thought but comfortable in the silence. When they arrived, Mrs. Johnson gave them a knowing look but made no comment as she gathered her things to return to her own home. "The children were angels," she assured Tabitha. That Samuel has quite an imagination, been telling me all about the horses he's going to raise when he grows up, after Mrs. Johnson departed. Vaughn stayed for dinner as usual, but there was a new awareness between him and Tabitha, a current of possibility that made every glance, every accidental touch, more significant. When it was time for him to leave, Tabitha walked him to his horse, the children already tucked into bed after extracting a promise from Vaughn that he would return the following Sunday. "Thank you for today," Tabitha said as he prepared to mount. "For the ride, for the flowers, for—" She hesitated, "For believing that I might be ready for a new beginning." Vaughn stepped closer, his eyes asking a question. When Tabitha didn't move away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, brief kiss. It was their first, and though chaste by most standards, it sent warmth flooding through Tabitha's body. "Good night, Tabitha," Vaughn murmured as he pulled away. "I'll see you next Sunday." "Good night, Vaughn," she replied, her fingers touching her lips as she watched him ride away. That night, alone in the bed she had once shared with James, Tabitha allowed herself to truly contemplate a future with Vaughn. It would mean changes for all of them, a move to the Broken Spur, a blending of their lives, a new beginning. But perhaps that was what they all needed. The following weeks brought a deepening of their relationship. Vaughn continued his Sunday visits, now openly courting Tabitha with the blessing of the children, who were delighted by the prospect of having him as a permanent fixture in their lives. Emma, in particular, had taken to calling him Mr. Vaughn with such affection that it made Tabitha's heart swell to hear it. Samuel was more reserved, but he had begun looking for Vaughn's arrival as eagerly as his sister, positioning himself by the window each Sunday morning to be the first to spot the now familiar rider. As April turned to May, Tabitha found herself growing more certain of her feelings. The guilt that had initially accompanied her attraction to Vaughn had faded, replaced by a quiet conviction that James would approve of her choice. Vaughn was a good man, kind and honest, who treated her with respect and her children with genuine affection. On the first Sunday in May, Vaughn arrived with news that would change everything. "Daisy's about to foal," he announced as he dismounted. "Probably within the next day or two, according to Mr. Holden. I thought perhaps the children might like to be there when it happens." Emma, who had developed a special bond with the gentle mare, was ecstatic at the prospect. "Can we go now, Mama, please?" Tabitha looked at Vaughn questioningly. "To the Broken Spur," Vaughn nodded. "Mr. Holden suggested it himself. Said the children might enjoy seeing the ranch, and that you're welcome to stay in the guest room of the main house until the foal arrives. Mrs. Holden specifically mentioned wanting to meet you." The invitation surprised Tabitha. The Holdens were among the most respected families in the area, their ranch one of the largest and most successful. That they had expressed interest in meeting her suggested Vaughn had spoken of her to his employers. "It's a kind offer," Tabitha said cautiously, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," Vaughn assured her, "and truthfully I'd like you to see the ranch to meet the Holdens." His expression grew more serious. "To see where we might make our home if you were to accept my proposal." The directness of his statement made Tabitha's cheeks flush. He had been patient, not pressing her for an answer about marriage, but his intention remained clear. "Please, Mama," Emma pleaded, unaware of the undercurrents of the adult conversation. "I want to see Daisy's baby." Tabitha looked at her children's hopeful faces, then back to Vaughn. "Very well," she decided. "We'll come." The journey to the Broken Spur took just over an hour by wagon. As they approached, Tabitha was impressed by the size and prosperity of the operation. The main house was a substantial two-story structure, surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures where cattle and horses grazed. John and Martha Holden met them in the yard, a dignified couple in their 50s who greeted Tabitha and the children with genuine warmth. "We've heard so much about you from Vaughn," Martha said, taking Tabitha's hands in hers. "I'm delighted you could come." "Thank you for having us," Tabitha replied, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and well-worn boots beside Martha's more fashionable attire. If Martha noticed the difference, she gave no indication. The children must be eager to see the mare. "John, why don't you and Vaughn take them to the stable while I show Mrs. Pierce to her room?" The men nodded, and Vaughn led the excited children toward a large stable at the edge of the yard. Inside the main house, Tabitha was shown to a comfortable guest room with a view of the mountains. Martha provided fresh water and towels, then invited Tabitha to join her for tea in the parlor once she had settled in. "Vaughn speaks very highly of you," Martha commented as they sat with teacups in the well-appointed parlor. "He's a fine man, one of the best hands John has ever employed." "He's been a tremendous help to us," Tabitha acknowledged, taking a sip of the fragrant tea. "I don't know how we would have managed this winter without his assistance." Martha's eyes were kind but perceptive. "I believe his interest extends beyond mere neighborly concern, my dear." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm again. "Yes, he's made his intentions clear. And your feelings?" Martha asked gently, "I hope you don't mind my asking, but John and I have come to think of Vaughn almost as a son. We want to see him happy." "I care for him deeply," Tabitha admitted, "but it's complicated. My husband has been gone less than a year, and there are the children to consider and practical matters like the homestead." Martha nodded understandingly. "Grief doesn't follow a tidy schedule, nor do matters of the heart. But if I may offer an observation, I've known Vaughn since he arrived at the Broken Spur, and I've never seen him as content as he has been these past months. Whatever you decide, I believe you've already brought something valuable into his life." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of running feet, and Emma burst into the parlor, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mama, Mrs. Holden, Daisy is having her baby right now. You have to come see." Tabitha and Martha exchanged smiles and followed Emma to the stable, where they found Vaughn, John, and Samuel watching intently as Daisy lay in a bed of clean straw, clearly in labor. The ranch's stable hand stood nearby, monitoring the situation with experienced eyes. "Everything's progressing normally," the stable hand assured them. "Won't be long now." Tabitha knelt beside her children, explaining in simple terms what was happening as Daisy's labor intensified. When the foal's front hooves finally appeared, followed by its nose and then the rest of its body in a rush of movement, Emma gasped in wonder and Samuel's eyes grew round as saucers. The newborn foal, a chestnut colt with a white star on his forehead, lay still for a moment before struggling to his feet on wobbly legs. Daisy nickered softly, encouraging her offspring. "He's beautiful," Emma whispered, clutching Tabitha's hand. Vaughn crouched beside them, his expression tender as he watched the mother and foal. "What do you think we should name him?" Emma looked up in surprise. "We can name him." "Well, he's yours, isn't he?" Vaughn replied with a smile. "Daisy is your mare, so her foal belongs to you as well." Emma turned to Tabitha, her face alight with joy. "Did you hear that, Mama? He's ours." Tabitha looked at Vaughn, touched by his generosity. The mare and now the foal represented a significant gift, one that would provide practical help for their homestead, but also brought such happiness to her children. "What shall we call him?" she asked Emma and Samuel. The children conferred seriously for a moment before Emma announced, "Star." "Because of the white mark on his head. Star it is," Vaughn agreed, reaching out to stroke the foal's soft neck. "A fine name for a fine colt." The remainder of their visit to the Broken Spur was filled with new experiences for the children. John Holden showed Samuel how to groom a gentle old gelding, while Emma helped feed the chickens with Martha. Vaughn gave them a tour of the entire ranch, pointing out the small cabin that would be his when he became foreman, a tidy structure with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a small parlor, surrounded by a picket fence and a patch of garden. "It needs a woman's touch," he commented to Tabitha as they stood looking at the cabin while the children explored the nearby garden. "But it could be a good home." Tabitha surveyed the cabin, trying to imagine herself and the children living there. It was smaller than their homestead house but sturdier, with a proper roof and tight windows that wouldn't let in the winter drafts. And it came with security, a steady position for Vaughn, the protection of being part of the larger ranch community, access to help when needed. "What would happen to our homestead?" she asked, the practical question foremost in her mind. "We could keep it," Vaughn suggested. "Perhaps lease the land to a neighbor for growing hay or grazing cattle, or sell it if you preferred. The money could provide a nest egg for the children's future." His consideration of these practical matters impressed Tabitha. Vaughn wasn't asking her to simply abandon the home she had built with James. He was offering options, respecting the importance of that legacy. As the afternoon waned, they prepared to return to the Pierce homestead. The Holdens insisted they stay for supper first, and the meal was a pleasant affair, with John telling stories of his early days in Colorado territory and Martha offering Tabitha recipes and household advice. When it was time to leave, Martha pressed a basket of food into Tabitha's hands. "For your breakfast tomorrow," she explained. "And please come visit again soon. It's been a delight having young ones around the place." The journey home was quiet, the children drowsy after their exciting day. When they arrived at the homestead, Vaughn carried the sleeping Samuel to his bed while Tabitha helped a yawning Emma change into her nightgown. Once the children were settled, Tabitha and Vaughn stood on the porch in the cool evening air. The stars spread across the sky in a brilliant canopy, the silence of the countryside broken only by the distant call of a coyote. "Thank you for today," Tabitha said softly. "The children had a wonderful time," Vaughn nodded, leaning against the porch railing. "And you?" "What did you think of the Broken Spur?" "It's a fine place," she acknowledged. "The Holdens are good people. They liked you," Vaughn told her. "Martha told me so while you were getting the children ready to leave, said you had a steady spirit that she admired." Tabitha smiled at that. "A polite way of saying I'm stubborn, perhaps." "Determined," Vaughn corrected, reaching for her hand. "Strong, qualities I admire in you." He drew her closer, his free hand coming up to touch her cheek gently. "Tabitha, I've been patient because I respect your need for time. But I want you to know that my feelings haven't changed. If anything, they've grown stronger with each passing week." Tabitha looked up at him in the moonlight, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. In that moment, with the memory of the day fresh in her mind, Vaughn's kindness to her children, the respect shown to her by the Holdens, the promise of security and companionship, she made her decision. "I don't need more time," she said quietly. "I've given it considerable thought, and my answer is yes, Vaughn, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You've made me the happiest man in Colorado," he murmured against her hair. When they pulled apart, Tabitha added one condition. "But I'd like to wait until June. That would mark a year since James passed." "It seems respectful," Vaughn nodded, understanding. "Of course, and it will give us time to prepare to help the children adjust to the idea." Their engagement was sealed with a tender kiss beneath the stars, a promise of new beginnings and shared futures. The following morning, Tabitha gathered Emma and Samuel at the breakfast table to share the news. "Children, I have something important to tell you," she began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mr. Vaughn has asked me to marry him, and I have said yes. He will become your stepfather, and we will all move to the cabin at the Broken Spur." Emma's face lit up immediately. "Does that mean Mr. Vaughn will live with us forever, and will be near Daisy and Star all the time?" "Yes, sweetheart," Tabitha confirmed with a smile. "That's exactly what it means." Samuel was quieter, his small brow furrowed in thought. "But what about Papa?" he asked finally. "Won't he be sad if you marry Mr. Vaughn?" Tabitha's heart ached at the innocent question. She pulled Samuel onto her lap, holding him close. "Papa will always be your father, and we will always love him and remember him. But Papa is in heaven now, and I believe he would want us to be happy and well cared for. Mr. Vaughn is a good man who loves us and wants to help take care of our family." Samuel considered this, then nodded slowly. "I think Papa would like Mr. Vaughn." He's good at fixing things like Papa was. Yes, he is, Tabitha agreed, relief washing over her at her son's acceptance. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Most reactions were positive. Tabitha was young to be a widow with 2 small children, and Vaughn was well respected in the area. The Holdens' approval carried significant weight, silencing any who might have thought the courtship too brief. Mrs. Johnson, who had grown fond of Tabitha and the children, was particularly pleased. "That man has looked at you like you hung the moon since the first time I saw you together," she declared when Tabitha shared the news. "And it's high time you had someone to lean on, child. James would approve, mark my words." The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with preparations. Martha Holden insisted on hosting the ceremony and celebration at the Broken Spur, and she helped Tabitha sew a new dress for the occasion, a simple but elegant gown of pale blue cotton with lace trim at the collar and cuffs. Vaughn spent his free time preparing the foreman's cabin, making repairs and improvements to ensure it would be comfortable for his new family. He built a set of bunk beds for the children's room and a rocking chair for the parlor, presenting the latter to Tabitha with shy pride. "Every home needs a place for a mother to rock her children," he explained as she ran her hands over the smooth wood. "My mother had a chair like this, and some of my best memories are of her reading to me while she rocked." The gesture touched Tabitha deeply, for it showed Vaughn's understanding of what mattered most to her children's happiness and well-being. As the wedding day approached, Tabitha made a final visit to James's grave in the small cemetery outside Hecla. She went alone, needing this private moment to say goodbye to one chapter of her life before beginning another. Standing beside the simple wooden marker, Tabitha spoke softly to the husband she had loved. "I'm getting married tomorrow, James. His name is Vaughn, and he's a good man. He loves the children, and he's been kind to me when we needed kindness most." She paused, wiping away a tear. "I will always love you. You gave me Emma and Samuel, and years of happiness I'll never forget, but I think you would want us to move forward to find joy again." The gentle breeze that rustled the grass around the grave seemed like an answer, a blessing. Tabitha placed the wildflowers she had brought on the grave, then turned toward home, toward her future. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, a perfect June morning. The Broken Spur was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, and guests from throughout the area gathered to witness the ceremony. The local minister presided, with John Holden standing as Vaughn's best man and Martha attending Tabitha. Emma, dressed in a new frock made from fabric Martha had provided, scattered flower petals along the path as Tabitha walked toward Vaughn, who waited beneath an arch of roses and greenery. Samuel carried a small pillow with the rings, his solemn face a picture of concentration as he fulfilled his important duty. When Tabitha reached Vaughn, he took her hands in his eyes filled with love and promise. The minister's words were traditional, but they resonated deeply as Tabitha and Vaughn pledged themselves to each other and to the creation of their new family. "I, Vaughn, take you, Tabitha, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Tabitha's voice was steady as she repeated her vows, her heart full as she looked into Vaughn's eyes and saw her future reflected there, a future of partnership, respect, and love. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vaughn's kiss was tender but filled with promise. The assembled guests applauded, and Emma rushed forward to hug them both, with Samuel following more shyly. The celebration that followed was joyous, with a feast provided by the Holdens, music from local musicians, and dancing that continued until sunset. As the festivities wound down, Vaughn and Tabitha prepared to spend their first night in their new home, the foreman's cabin, now transformed into a family dwelling. Martha had arranged for the children to stay at the main house for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy for their first evening as husband and wife. As they walked hand in hand toward the cabin in the gathering dusk, Tabitha felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Vaughn sensed her mood and squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We have all the time in the world," he murmured. "There's no rush for anything." Inside the cabin, Vaughn had arranged a final surprise: a vase of wildflowers on the table, a bottle of wine sent by Mr. Holden, and a small wrapped package beside Tabitha's plate. "What's this?" she asked, picking up the package. "Open it and see," Vaughn encouraged. Inside was a locket, simple but beautiful, with a delicate chain. When Tabitha opened it, she found it contained two small portraits, one of Emma and Samuel that she recognized as having been taken in town several weeks ago, and one of James, which must have come from the photograph she kept in her Bible. "I thought you should have them all close to your heart," Vaughn explained. "James will always be part of your life, part of the children's lives. I don't want to change that." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes at his thoughtfulness, at his understanding of what she needed. "Help me put it on," she asked, handing him the locket and turning so he could fasten it around her neck. His fingers were gentle as they brushed her skin, and when she turned back to face him, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I love you, Tabitha Calloway," he said, using her new name for the first time. "And I love you, Vaughn Calloway," she replied, stepping into his embrace. Their first night as husband and wife was a tender discovery of each other, a gradual deepening of intimacy that left them both breathless and content in each other's arms. The following morning, the children returned, bursting with stories of their night at the main house and eager to begin their life as a family in the new cabin. Vaughn had prepared a special breakfast, and as they sat around the table, he raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes meeting Tabitha's over the rim of his cup. "To family," she added, her heart full as she looked at the faces around the table: Emma's bright smile, Samuel's serious eyes, Vaughn's loving gaze. In the months that followed, they settled into their new life at the Broken Spur. Vaughn excelled as foreman, earning the respect of the ranch hands and the continued trust of the Holdens. Tabitha established a productive garden beside the cabin, kept chickens for eggs, and helped Martha with various ranch duties. Emma thrived in the ranch environment, developing a genuine talent for working with horses under Vaughn's patient tutelage. Samuel was quieter but equally content, showing an interest in carpentry that Vaughn encouraged by teaching him simple skills appropriate for his age. Daisy and her colt, Star, were kept in a small corral near the cabin, where the children could visit them daily. By autumn, Star was growing rapidly, showing promise of becoming as fine a horse as his mother. When Thanksgiving arrived, the Calloways joined the Holdens and the ranch hands for a communal celebration in the main house. As they gathered around the table laden with food, John Holden asked each person to share something they were thankful for. When Vaughn's turn came, he looked at Tabitha with a smile that still made her heart skip. "I'm thankful for second chances," he said simply. "For finding a new purpose and a new family when I thought that part of my life was over." Tabitha, when her turn came, placed a hand over her still flat stomach and shared the news they had only confirmed the previous day. "I'm thankful for our growing family," she announced. "We're expecting a baby in early summer." The table erupted in congratulations, with Emma jumping up to hug her mother and ask excited questions about her future sibling. Samuel seemed more contemplative, but when Vaughn asked him privately if he was happy about the news, the boy nodded. "I'll be a big brother to two people now," he said solemnly. "That's an important job." "The most important," Vaughn agreed, ruffling Samuel's hair affectionately. As winter settled over the Broken Spur, the Calloway cabin was a haven of warmth and happiness. On particularly cold evenings, they would gather around the fireplace, with Tabitha in her rocking chair, reading stories to the children while Vaughn whittled or repaired tack. Sometimes, in quiet moments when the children were asleep, Tabitha would think back to that desperate winter day when she had set out for town with empty cupboards and hungry children. never imagining that the stranger she would meet on the trail would change their lives so completely. "What are you thinking about?" Vaughn asked one such evening, finding her standing by the window, gazing out at the moonlit snow. "I was remembering the day we met," she told him, leaning back against his chest as he wrapped his arms around her. "How close I came to not taking that trip to town because the weather was so bad. Then I would have found another way to meet you," Vaughn said confidently, his hand coming to rest on the gentle swell of her stomach where their child grew. "Some things are meant to be, Tabitha. Some journeys are destined to cross." Tabitha turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "I believe you're right, and I'm grateful every day that our paths crossed when they did." Their kiss was sweet with the contentment of hard-won happiness, of love found in unexpected places, of a family forged through compassion and courage. Outside, the Colorado winter continued its course, the snow piling deep around the cabin, but inside was all the warmth they needed, the warmth of home, of family, of love that had bloomed from kindness when it was needed most. The following June, as summer spread its warmth across the land, Tabitha gave birth to a healthy son they named William James Calloway. The labor was difficult but manageable with Martha Holden and the local midwife in attendance, and Vaughn's anxious pacing outside the bedroom door became a story that would be told for years to come. When he was finally allowed to enter and see his wife and newborn son, Vaughn's face showed such wonder and love that Tabitha's heart overflowed with joy. Emma and Samuel were brought in soon after, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and awe as they met their baby brother. "He's so small," Emma whispered, gently touching William's tiny hand. "But he'll grow," Samuel said with the wisdom of his 5 years. "Just like Star did." Vaughn laughed softly at the comparison, his arm around Tabitha's shoulders as she cradled their son. "He certainly will. And he'll have the best big brother and sister to help him learn everything he needs to know." The children beamed at this responsibility, already taking their roles as older siblings seriously. As William grew from infant to toddler, the family's happiness continued to deepen. The Broken Spur prospered under John Holden's leadership and Vaughn's capable management, providing stability and security for all who worked there. Tabitha found fulfillment not only in motherhood, but also in the small business she started, selling preserves and baked goods in town. Her berry jam became particularly sought after, and the extra income allowed them to save for the children's future. The Pierce homestead, which they had decided to keep, was leased to a young couple newly arrived from the East. The arrangement provided additional income, and the satisfaction of knowing the land James had loved was being cared for properly. On William's first birthday, as they celebrated with a small gathering at their cabin, Vaughn presented Tabitha with a surprise, a deed in her name for 20 acres of prime land adjacent to the Broken Spur. "What's this for?" she asked, puzzled by the gift. "For our future," Vaughn explained. "Mr. Holden offered to sell it to me at a fair price. I thought someday, when the children are older, we might want to build our own ranch. Not as big as the Broken Spur, but something that would be ours, that we could pass down to our children." Tabitha was touched by his foresight, his planning for a future together that stretched far beyond the present moment. "It's perfect," she told him, understanding that this was not just a gift of land but a promise of permanence, of roots sinking deep into the Colorado soil. That evening, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Tabitha and Vaughn sat on the porch of their cabin, looking out at the stars that spangled the vast western sky. William slept peacefully in his cradle beside them, his tiny hand curled around his mother's finger. "I never thought I'd be this happy again," Tabitha confessed softly. "After James died, it seemed like all the light had gone from the world, that winter when the food ran out and I didn't know how I would feed the children." She shook her head at the memory. "I was so close to giving up hope." Vaughn took her free hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm as he often did when they talked of serious matters. "I know that feeling," he said. After Sarah and the baby died, I went through the motions of living, but there wasn't much joy in it, just work and sleep and more work. He glanced at her. Until that snowy day when I met a stubborn woman with 2 hungry children, determined to make it to town despite the weather. Tabitha smiled at his description. I wasn't sure whether to trust you, you know, a stranger on the trail, offering help to a woman alone. Yet you invited me to stay at your homestead, Vaughn reminded her. Offered me dinner when you barely had enough for yourselves. It seemed like the right thing to do, Tabitha said simply. And then you bartered your saddle for grain at the general store when Mr. Winters wouldn't extend my credit. I still remember what you said. We'll eat, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to include yourself in our family's welfare. Vaughn smiled at the memory. It felt natural even then. Something about you and the children just called to me, made me want to help to protect you. He squeezed her hand gently. I didn't know then that I was already falling in love with you. When did you know? Tabitha asked, curious. Vaughn considered the question. I think it was that first Sunday dinner at your homestead. Watching you with the children, seeing your strength and grace despite everything you'd been through. By the time I left that night, I knew I wanted to come back. Knew I wanted to be part of your life if you'd have me. Tabitha leaned her head against his shoulder. For me, it was when you built the rocking chair, such a thoughtful gift, understanding exactly what would matter to me. That's when I knew for certain that I loved you. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny from the horses in the corral, the soft hooting of an owl hunting in the darkness. You ever wonder how differently things might have turned out? Tabitha asked eventually. If we hadn't met that day on the trail, Vaughn shook his head. I believe some things are meant to be, remember, if not that day, then another. Our paths were destined to cross. Tabitha smiled at his certainty. It was one of the things she loved about him, his unwavering faith in the rightness of their journey together. William stirred in his cradle, making the small snuffling noises that usually preceded waking for a feeding. Tabitha lifted him gently, cradling him to her breast as he nursed, his eyes opening briefly to gaze at his mother before closing again in contentment. Vaughn watched them, his expression tender. He has your eyes, he observed, and your determination. Did you see how he rolled over yesterday? Martha says that's early for his age. He has your smile, Tabitha countered, and your calm nature. Thank goodness, Emma was a much fussier baby. The easy way they discussed their children, both those born to other partners and the son they shared, was a testament to the family they had created together, blended from loss and hope into something new and precious. As William finished nursing and drifted back to sleep, Tabitha adjusted her clothing and settled him back in his cradle. Vaughn put his arm around her, drawing her close against the cooling night air. I love you, Tabitha Calloway, he murmured against her hair, more with each passing day. And I love you, she replied, turning to meet his kiss. For everything you are and everything you've helped us become. The future stretched before them, rich with possibility, the land they would develop, the children they would raise, the life they would continue to build together. From the darkest winter had come the brightest spring, a testament to resilience, to new beginnings, to love found when least expected but most needed. As they made their way inside, Vaughn carrying the sleeping William, Tabitha paused at the threshold of their home. For a moment, she thought of the desperate woman she had been, facing an empty pantry and hungry children, and marveled at the journey that had brought her here, to abundance, to security, to love. Some journeys began in snow and ended in sunshine. Some paths crossed at exactly the right moment. And sometimes, the barter of a cowboy's saddle for grain was the first step toward a future neither could have imagined, but both had somehow always been seeking.